Welcome to the Paying It Forward podcast, episode 8.
Establish relationships, get to know what others do, get to know how it fits with whatever your goals are, and all of those kinds of things. And and people will, if you show you take time to care about what other people are doing, people want to work with people like that.
Hi, and welcome to the Paying It Forward podcast. My name is Steve Richards. Thank you for listening. I believe if you want to attain a C-level position in your career, you need to understand what it takes to achieve that level of leadership. When you have access to successful entrepreneurs and senior executives who want to help you develop the skills and traits to become a great leader, it's like having your own mastermind group to mentor and guide you. In a nutshell, that's our podcast. Welcome to today's episode. Traditionally, our episodes last 30 to 40 minutes at the very most. Today's episode is approximately 1 hour long, but it is full of exceptional material. My guest today is Jay Spenchian. Jay is an award-winning, digitally savvy marketing and general management leader with an exceptional history of transforming deep consumer insights and big data into record-breaking products, sales, innovative marketing initiatives, and growth for Fortune 500 brands. Jay's experience includes not only multiple industries and brands, but he's been highly successful in the general management, marketing, and chief marketing officer roles in consumer products, consumer durables, the restaurant, automotive, and telecommunication industries. In today's episode, Jay takes all of his experience, having gone from Pepsi and Heinz and the vice president general manager role at Pillsbury, from executive director of marketing at Cadillac, the president and chief operating officer at Saab, from executive director and chief marketing officer at General Motors, and his experiences at Darden Restaurants and US Cellular as chief marketing officer. Jay explains to us what makes a great team player or great team leader, why humility, adaptability, flexibility, trust, and relationship building are absolutely essential to your success. What key things do you need to make sure and consider on your resume? How to stand out and what you should be doing today already to stand out every day. Why transparency is critical. And finally, Jay offers us insight into why it's important to not be afraid to challenge the status quo, how to utilize that in your career, and how not to be afraid to fail and learn. It is my distinct honor and pleasure to welcome you, Jay, to our podcast today. Thank you for being with us.
Hey, it's great to be here, Steve.
When you were coming out of graduate school, did you always want to be in marketing?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, as a young person kind of coming out, you think you know what jobs are like, but you really don't. I never, truth be told, never loved marketing that much from a marketing standpoint, from a class standpoint when I came out. And I started off as an operations, management trainee. And my first job out of school was I rotated through different disciplines. And so as I rotated through the different disciplines, I came into marketing as one of them. And what I found out was I really liked it. And one thing I really liked about it was that every day was a little bit different when you're in marketing. And also you're really kind of you're a little bit more driving the agenda, and you're kind of driving the initiatives versus kind of doing the same things over and over again. Like when you're in operations, it's kind of repeating the same things. Or if you're in finance, you kind of repeat the same things. And that, again, for some people, that's great. That's a great discipline, and people have tremendous careers doing that. For my personal interest, I love the variety of one day you're very strategic and you're like 50,000 feet in the air. And then, other days you're very tactical, working on the plant or shop floor or in the retail environment, working with people. And so that's really what got me interested in marketing.
So over the years, you've held various positions and obviously increased your responsibility across multiple, I'll call it industries. The question I have from a leadership standpoint to start there, what makes a great team player or leader?
Yeah, I think there's a few things when I think about leadership. I think humility, probably adaptability, flexibility, coaching. I think those are all great leadership skills. As a leader, do you assemble, great teams? And what do you look for when you're building a team? And then, here's an important one for me is when your team has not completed a task, or they've, in essence failed. How do you handle that? How do you talk to people about that? I think that really says a lot to you about leadership. But I mean, if you're, trying to be a leader, I think the most important thing is you build trust and you build relationships. And so people know, no matter if they're above, below, or on the side of you as peers, that they can count on you and that what you say is what you're going to do. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, it's about building those relationships and it's about building those trusts as a leader. And people need to, you set up an environment where people feel comfortable, expressing their opinion and, challenging the status quo. And they understand that that's going to be accepted, and that's the environment that you create.
So, as a leader, over the years, you've had the opportunity to hire and promote people. What do you look for when you're hiring or promoting people? And what's been the biggest challenge you see in that area?
When I'm hiring people and I'm looking at people's resumes, what I try to look for is progress and moving up within the organizations that they are. In other words, have they progressed and been promoted in the same organization? And so there's progress within that organization rather than moving from job to job to job to get promoted. In other words, so you're at a manager level and you get promoted. You've shown you went from associate manager to director at company X versus you went from associate at company X to manager at company Y to director at company Z. And so you've never shown that progress within, you've never been promoted in the organization. The only way you get promoted is to go outside and go to a new job. Now, I've heard people say that isn't as valued anymore, or that they don't think that is a red flag as much as it used to be. To me, it was used to be a red flag. It's like, okay, so the reason that they're moving their companies is because they're stalling out. They're stalling out, and so they're not going to get promoted. And the only way they're going to get promoted is to go to a new company. And so then they jump around. And then also, I mean, again, back when we were doing it, moving around companies was just starting to be okay. Now it's like, hey, it's almost the expectation that you're going to have, 4 or 5, 6 companies or something like that. You're just not going to stay.
That's an interesting answer or take. And I've had a couple people I've talked to already that I've had a very similar twist. I had one person who said, we have to get out of the business of training people and expecting them to stay. We have to develop people knowing this may not be their only and last stop. I thought that was an interesting answer because I was thinking, I was so used to not job hopping that the first time my first job was 2 years, my second job was 5 years, and then I went into another 4-year job, and then I opened my own company. But after that, it was pretty simple. But I've had multiple clients along the way. Normally, we traditionally think of job hopping as bad, but that's really the way people were getting ahead.
Yeah, they could, but you also would have mix where somebody's been promoted a couple of times and then they just decide, or they took a lateral to go to another company, and then got promoted there, which is another good sign. Again, I'm just speaking to more things that I've seen and, has been more predictive of somebody that's going to be doing pretty well.
So you're an advocate of early on in your career probably staying to get some promos and then jump when there's a logical time.
Or not necessarily early in your career, but just when you're in, when you've made a move, that it's just, to me, it'd be nice to, number one, stay long enough to put points on the board. So you eat your own dog food, as they say, right? So, you've decided you've had to execute your own plans, or you're not, like when you first get somewhere, you're probably on the tail end of what was somebody else's plans, and you have to execute those. And then it takes probably a good 18 months for your stuff to get in market and then have an effect. And then ultimately, then you see how it does, and then you kind of go from there. So, I'd just say that more often than not, that to me, that's a good sign, is where you've shown progression and advancement within the company that you've been in versus, just bouncing around and not ever having been promoted at your, in your current company.
Yeah. That makes sense. So that's when you're reviewing resumes. How about when you hire or promote them specifically?
Yeah, I think let's take hiring first. So when you're hiring people, what you're really looking for is there's like 3 things. Can they do the job? Do they really want the job? And then ultimately, are they going to be a fit, from a personality and culture standpoint for the team and the organization? So you're kind of going down those paths. And, for us in marketing, We want to make sure that they've got the technical marketing skills. That would be a focus on the end consumer, to be able to draw out what consumers are looking for. I would say marketing's pretty easy. If you do a very good job, if you ask people what they're looking for, you typically can then go ahead and deliver that and get the organization to deliver it. But you have to create an environment where they're going to tell you, what it is that they're looking for. I want to make sure that the employee's got a history of challenging the status quo, and that they've driven innovation and growth and in the areas, and they've influenced others. So from an influence standpoint, have they been good leaders? Are they good coaches? Do they have good examples of coaching and developing their team? What do they? It's the same question. What do you look for when you're hiring people? Are they adaptable? Do they have strong ability to learn? Those are two things that adaptability to all different levels, and a strong ability to learn. To me, those have been so important in terms of advancing and from a culture standpoint. And you want team players. You want people that can demonstrate that they know how to work well with others, because that is going to be the ultimate, is that everybody is going to be working toward what they perceive to be the same goals. But at the end of the day, that doesn't always happen. And I think you've got to be able to figure out, how do you manage through those conflicts and some of that. And the final thing is, I want people that know how to work hard, but also know how to have fun, because there has to be balance. It can't be, you got to celebrate the successes, and you have to understand, when it's time, when, what you've learned from that, when you failed, and make sure that, there's an insulate. But I just think really, as I'm trying to hire people, probably the biggest things that stand out are initiative, and just people that have gone above and beyond, whether it's, in past jobs or in helping other people to develop and grow.
Of those three main things, what's the single most important thing? If I were coming out of college today, or I've been in the marketplace 4 or 5 years, and I'm trying to get into an organization to work for you, you're interviewing me, you're hiring me, or you're thinking about hiring me, what's the number one thing that you need to be sure I have no matter what?
Yeah, I think, to me, it's just this idea of, I look for challenging, where I've challenged the status quo, I've taken some risks, I've tried some different things, and I also look for people that maybe haven't, what have you failed at? Where have you really tried something? And importantly, everyone fails. I mean, there are things that you fail at all the time, but what did you learn from it? And how did you grow from that? And how did you get better? Because I think the people that stand out are the ones that are, I always say, they're a couple steps ahead of everyone, and they're making others around them better. So they're making, whether they're making their boss better, whether they're making people below them better, they're making their peers better, because they have good relationships with them. They're either mentoring them, they're coaching them, and it's not just about the job at hand, but it's just really about about making the organization better. And that's that's really the number one thing. It's like, wait, are you going above and beyond? Are you really standing out? Because think about it, you're hiring a lot of people that, especially coming out of school, they've been trained the same way. They've gone to the same classes. Okay, so what did you do differently? How did you make others if you had group studies, how did you make everybody better in that group? How did you inspire others to be better? What role did you play? Those kinds of things.
How would you get me to answer that question about how I've made other people better, how I've been a leader in certain situations? How do I display that to you? How do I prove that?
Again, most people have had either jobs, whether they've had jobs, they've played on sports teams, they've been on school projects where they played a role, and they can give examples of, okay, here's what I did to make the team better. Here's what I did to do that. I think that, again, it's back to what I was saying before, is, can you do the job? So do you have kind of the background for it? Yeah, these people probably have that. Can you, do you want the job? What's your enthusiasm? Is it a fit for you? And that's where I think, people can really get better, is understand the company, understand the culture, and make sure you're demonstrating and you believe and you find out through the interviewing process that it is a mutual fit. Ask all the right questions. So ask the questions about it's a two-way street. Here's what, you have expectations, but you also want to understand about that company. But you also should know a lot about the company. You don't want a job just to have a job. You want to know a lot about what that company does, how that company's been successful, what that company's culture is like, so that you can you can find tangible examples from your background that show how you've demonstrated that and how you are a fit for that. So you make it easy for your interviewer, and typically, you'll have accomplishments, but it's how you get them done. And then when you explain how you get them done, they'll find out whether that's a fit or not. And honestly, Steve, most of the time I've found is when people don't get hired, it's just because they're not a fit for that culture, or it's just really not the right job for them. And I would say that happens in whether I'm promoting people or whether I'm assessing people. Most of the people that aren't qualified for promotion usually aren't happy in the job. They're not inspired by it. They're not, it's not motivating to them. And so it's not a fit. And so they're not happy whether they know it or not. They just aren't, they don't have the energy and they don't have the drive for it.
So as part of leading, you mentioned earlier about trust. How do you go about building trust 360? So as an executive, you have to build trust with your span of control. You also have to build it upward, sideways, all that, the 360. How do you build trust with folks, and then how do you expect folks to build trust with you?
Yeah, I think the way you first build trust with others is, number one, I think you start with a goal of you're going to be the same person to everybody. In other words, you're going to, one of the things I've heard in my career, which has helped me, is that I'm the same person to the board of directors that I am to the senior leadership team that I'm a part of, that I am to the people that are working on the front lines, whether they're in the retail store, whether they're on the factory floor. They would say the same things about me. They would think I'm the same person. So I don't act any differently. Of course, you'd approach, and frame how you present things or what you talk about very differently. But in terms of approachability, ability to talk to those people, making them, and it starts with kind of seeking to understand. So get to know people, get to know what their job is. Don't just walk in and say, hey, purchasing, this is what I need and this is what I need to get done. Stop and sit down, develop a little bit of relation, understand what they're doing. Oh, and this is how what I'm trying to do fits with you. And so ultimately, as you start to do your orientations or you get to know people, then you have relationships with them, and then it's not transactional. And then also be very transparent. When something isn't working right and you didn't like the way something was, don't let them hear it from somebody else. Don't whine and complain to your team. Go back and talk to the people where, and just say, hey, this happened and it wasn't what I expected. And that's the kind of thing where people, the transparency, you're going to build trust. When somebody it doesn't hear something from somebody else that they didn't hear from you. And, that's the kind of thing. And then also that you not only just care about your area, but you care about how the others and how it all fits together. And so you're an organizational team player. So you're about trying to make the organization and the team better. And so I think that that's good. And then how do they build trust with me? It's like, deliver what you say. There's a saying that says, people may doubt what you say, but they'll believe what you do. And, to me, that's it, is the actions are, you can tell me anything, but ultimately, if you don't deliver, if you keep saying, well, I'm going to do something and then you don't do it, that doesn't build a lot of trust. And so, you just want to know, and are you the same person all the time? I think some of the best bosses I've had are unbelievably predictable because you get to know them so well. You just know, okay, and that's how you get a couple steps ahead of them. You go, they're not gonna like if I take this approach, or and not that you just want to manage to what your boss does, but there's an element of that that's really, really important. And you to be predictable and don't, if you're grounded in all the right things and your values are right about making the business better, making the people better, people are going to know where you stand almost on all issues, and it's going to build a lot of trust and transparency. I mean, again, it can sound old-fashioned, it can sound old school, but there's some basic tenets of relationships and and just working and just human interaction that haven't changed. They just now you have more technology. Now you have you have different other social pressures and other things like that have changed, but at its underlying core, there's some basic characteristics that are still very essential to being successful. Another just piece of advice that I would give is, and this is just classic arrival at any company, is the first 90 days are so critical to establishing those relationships. And so asking a lot of questions, understanding you don't know what you don't know, showing respect, learning more about, other functions, other areas, before you decide to make recommendations or act, that's really important, especially as you come in at a higher level from the outside, because people will be expecting you. And, the tendency is, oh my gosh, they're expecting me to come out with the plan and make all these changes and do all that stuff. But what you have to really do is to get the respect and to get the trust of people is they have to know that you really understand what's really going on. And that takes time. That'll take at least 90 days. And you're doing the majority of asking questions. And I've learned too through my career is that what it looks like on the surface, like maybe was a silly decision, or you think, oh my gosh, well, how could they make that decision? Then you're like, now about 60 days later, you look at it and you go, oh my gosh, I would have done the same thing with the same set of data that they had. But it's like you wouldn't know that, so you don't want to come in being super critical of something like that before you've kind of established a rapport that says, hey, I've done my due diligence, and doing all of that. So I think that there's an arrival period. They always say if you're going to do one of two things. You're going to either live up to your first 90 days reputation, or you're going to spend the rest of your career trying to live it down. And that's pretty important.
Seek to understand sounds like that's first and foremost. Assessing what is going on in the organization. If I'm coming in and I've got this new job and I'm working for a leader, and let's say I'm working for you, where might I make mistakes? I know you said the first 90 days you could live it up or live it down for a long time. In those first 90 days, how am I able to stand out? How am I able to make sure I don't make faux pas? Like, I like the challenging, I like the go against the status quo, but in those first 90 days, it's a make or break window. How do I avoid screwing it up?
Yeah, just it's what I was saying is make sure you're asking enough questions. A balance of 70% ask, 30% tell would be my advice. Is that because there's going to be a lot of newness. There's going to be a lot of new people that you don't have relationships. So what you'd be able to do after you've established some relationships, people can be very forgiving, even if you might make a misstep or something like that. It wasn't intentional. It could be interpreted that way. But if you have a relationship, they'll be okay with it. Whereas in the first 90 days, they don't know you very well. And if you're going to try and do that, that's what I was saying. The tendency is people want to make a difference, and they want to prove that they belong. And so there's this urgency to try and put points on the board or do things. And you just have to resist that. You have to be patient and, take your time to learn and ask questions. Something, and it doesn't apply necessarily to brand new people, but when I get into roles, there's 5 questions I usually ask. And I start with the board of directors, and I also do it with the senior leadership team. I do it with my peers, and then I do it with my team as well. And my peers are the ones that lead the other functions. And I say, what are we doing well? What are our opportunities as a company? Where do you think marketing, can help? And what do you think marketing can do differently? And then how can I, in this role, what can I do to help us achieve our goals and all of that? And then when you kind of do that, and number one, you get around and get to meet everybody pretty quickly that you really need to meet in a setting that's pretty informal, and they're giving you the answers. And because you're brand new, they're not worried about like offending marketing. They're not afraid, so they'll tell it like it is. And then you assemble all this, and you get a good sense of, okay, here's kind of the pulse in a very quick period of time of what this organization thinks we're doing well, where marketing could really make a difference. And then ultimately, what I can do in this job and what are the expectations, what hasn't been done before. And so when you come out with your plans, it's probably going to be very similar to what everybody wants. And so everybody's going to see a little bit of themselves in what your plans are. And so when you come out and say, hey, I think we need to do this, you have a pretty high degree of confidence. That's what everybody wants to do. And they haven't been, so it's not your plan, it's their plan, and it's recognizing, the experience of what they've seen in the marketplace and leveraging that, and they really appreciate that. So, to me, and again, think of your, whatever version of that is as a brand new employee, but, I would say that's really, it's kind of back to what I was saying before is, establish relationships, get to know what others do, get to know how it fits with whatever your goals are, and all of those kinds of things. And, and then and people will, if you show you take time to care about what other people are doing, people want to work with people like that.
I imagine during these conversations that occasionally there's a rub, something comes up where we just got to reconcile it. I don't know if it's conflict or not, but do you ever run into situations, or have you experienced situations where there's a little bit of a disconnect, a misalignment, a conflict, pick whatever level comes to mind, where it needs to be resolved? And how do you approach that? What advice would you give people in approaching a situation where it needs resolution?
Yeah, I think it happens all the time. I mean, no matter what, and it's not because people don't have good intentions. I think people have very good intentions and are working toward what they believe are their goals and what they think they need to do. But sometimes those goals are not necessarily aligned. And, as an example, if you're working and you're trying to be very aggressive in marketing with some of your claims that you might want to put, on television or in your digital ads or some of the things, and you're going to make a claim, and your legal department is going to be very nervous about you making those claims because they don't want the company to get sued. And so you're saying, okay, well, yeah, but if we don't take an aggressive stance on this, we're going to fall behind, and we're there's because the category everybody else is kind of doing it. And again, it's not because everybody else is doing it, but because that's just the way the category goes. And again, what's the risk? But that's a conflict, and so rather than as a marketer, I mean, you can ultimately say to legal, look, thanks for the advice, but we're going with it. I mean, depending on the company, that's usually the hierarchy. But that doesn't usually, it isn't something to me that you want. You want to be able to go sit down with legal and say, okay, let me understand why you're concerned. Let me understand what it is you're thinking, because I think we just need to understand that. Make sure you fully seek to understand what's their position and why, and then ultimately say what you want to do and why and what the goal is. Because ultimately, you both want to do something good for the company. But at the
Right.
end of the day, both believe that what they're doing is the right thing to do. But you can't get to a mutual agreement and mutual understanding unless you understand both sides of it. And if you haven't established that relationship and the trust, and I'd say do a lot of this in person. We do a lot of things that, back and forth. If it's text or if it's email, you're not going to resolve conflicts over. And it'd even be harder. I mean, we're working in COVID now, but I would say it'd be tougher to do that over Zoom. There's body language that you have to read. There's other things, and so I've always done that, and made appointments and sat down with people, and I've told people, don't send a zinger of an email and then expect that that's going to be pretty well received. Just go sit down and talk to them. Go sit down and
Yeah.
talk to them and say, hey, can we take 20 minutes and do that? They'll appreciate it so much, and the next time it gets easier and it gets easier, and you don't have to win all of them. Sometimes you're going to not win. So it's like, I had one employee of mine that just she wanted to win every single one of the conflict resolutions because she just felt she had to. And I said, if you go in thinking it's win lose, you're gonna, no one's want to negotiate with you. You just you have to be a little bit more flexible. I've mentioned it a couple of times. Flexibility and adaptability are two of the most important characteristics of any level, any leadership, any function. If you make sure that you've got both of those, you're gonna be very successful.
Yeah, I think those are some of the folks I've run into across my career have demonstrated very similar attributes that you described. They've been humble, they've had the adaptability, they've been flexible, they're open minded. They go into a situation realizing I have an opinion, I might win, I might lose, but I'm looking at the good of the church theory, the organization. I'm looking to make sure that the organization is advancing in the right vein.
Yeah, you talked about leadership earlier, and we talked about that. And it's like, don't take yourself too seriously. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Don't never forget where you came from, and remember what it was like when you were in some of these roles. And I think as long as you keep doing that, again, you'll appear to be the same person to every
Yeah.
single level. Would that's really would everybody say the same things about you, or would I don't want people below you saying different things about you than people that are your peers and or they're people that are above you. They should be saying very, very similar things. And the most successful people I've seen, that happens.
Well, that's a testament to a person's character, right? Their reputation precedes them, and it precedes them the same in every vein or walk of life that they go through. So, yeah, I like that. So along this path, it's been a pretty stellar career. Early on, or even now, do you or have you had any specific mentors, people that have taken to you, or in whatever way, shape, or form? How did Do you have any mentors, I guess is the first question.
Yeah, I think I do. And if I think back to even prior to, my career, just growing up, male coaches, male teachers that, I just admired, and I always looked at, whether how they treated people or how they interacted with people, how they motivated people. And I just looked at what the characteristics, how they did it and what characteristics they had. And I just said, I had kind of a good list and a bad list. And I'd say, okay, as a leader, I'm putting this in the good toolbox, and these are things that when this leader or this mentor or somebody was doing this, I didn't like it very much. And I saw what it did to others. And, I want to learn from that. I want to do that. And so I've really never officially kind of, it just happens, so like I have old bosses or, that I just can go to if I've got, I just call one of my old bosses, CEO, he's CEO of Pella. And I just called him. I said, hey, here's some things that I'm thinking about. I was wondering if I could, take an hour and kind of talk to you about it and see. And he knows me well enough. And I know that he's not going to tell me what I want to hear. He's going to be honest with me based on what he knows, about me and what he knows about what I tell him about the situation. And so I think, mentoring is important, but I think you also want to, it should be natural. You shouldn't be, I've always told people, if you want to have a mentor, understand what you're trying to get from that relationship. And hopefully it'll be part of the business. So it's not just one-sided, right? And so that mentor can also, I've had mentors that they've learned from me, and they've, because I've offered a little bit different perspective and they like that too. So they're getting something out of the relationship. And so it's not just one-sided. So I think it's really important. But I also don't think that you want to make it so that it's not natural, so that you just show up because, you're trying to network and you're trying to, it's just make it a part of the business or make it something that is either part of a project or something. I don't know. But I mean, I just think you have to be very sincere and honest and transparent. And
that's exactly what I was going to say. I think people can sniff out fake pretty quick.
yeah, I mean, what's the goal? What are you looking for? And what do you want? Why do you want to have a mentoring relationship? What is the goal? I mean, and usually, again, in my cases, it was from admiration. It's something that I saw in some people, and I really want to learn from you. And so I'm really asking you a favor. I'm asking you, can you share with me what some of the things that you've done and, how you, just like we're talking here, it's like, pay it forward. Share some of the things that have made you successful. Because I'm a serial learner. I mean, I always feel like you can get better. I feel like
Every day.
you never have it figured out, and you always can learn from somebody else. And it's like in marketing. I always say great ideas come from everywhere. You've created this environment where people feel very comfortable coming to you and saying, hey, how about this idea? What do you think about this? What if we did this? And you don't shoot them down. You don't belittle them. You don't make them feel like, hey, that's a really bad idea. You say, you know what, that's something let's think about that. We haven't thought about that. And I always tell people that, great ideas come from all over the place. And as you see people implement ideas and give them credit for where they came from, that creates another great environment. So you just, it's back to what we said before, is you want to foster. That's another thing too, is foster an environment where people aren't afraid to fail and they know that there won't be, it's like, okay, you blew it, you're gone, that kind of thing, or afraid to admit they don't have the answer. I mean, the worst thing I tell people is if you don't have an answer to a question and you're asked in a big group, don't make it up. Don't make it up. Just, I don't know is a perfectly acceptable answer, because if you make it up and it's wrong and you're confident, no one's gonna trust you after that. They're gonna say, look, the guy's just winging it all the time, and
your credibility's shot.
Your credibility's shot, and nobody, we got so much going on. Not everybody can know everything, and so nobody expects you to know everything. And so, have the confidence to know that what, sometimes I don't have all the answers, but I'll get it for you, and then follow up really quickly and get it to them.
Yeah, that's great advice right there. Have people sought you out? Have people come to you? I know you mentioned you have people and I like that idea that it's natural, a very natural type situation where you see things, you admire things, you sort of reach out in the altruistic fashion. Have people come to you and done the same thing?
All the time.
Yeah.
All the time. I mean,
That's
because, and mostly people that have worked for me and people that have been on my teams or worked with me side by side. So, I have even now just with the most recent company that I left, a woman that was working for me is, she's calling me. We've got time set up just every month just to kind of talk about
Hmm.
how she's feeling about things and what she wants to work on and what she's doing. And because she knows that, number one, that everything we talk about is confidential, and she knows that I have her best interests at heart, that I really want her to be successful, and I understand her. And so, same thing, another woman called me up, it was about a year ago, and I hadn't talked to her since I left Darden Restaurants, which was, probably 6, 7 years ago. And she just said, I just wanted to run some things by you. And,
Hmm.
this is what I'm thinking about doing. This is why I want to do it. And you've always been great to, kind of give me advice on this kind of stuff. Similar to the conversation I had with my old boss. And, and she's just so totally comfortable, laying it on the line and telling me that, and, being very honest with me and being very open and vulnerable, really. And that's what you've got to do. That's the other thing I would say too, is that, as you're a young person that is getting into, starting a job, so often people and their bosses don't get aligned on what success looks like or what a career path looks like, and understanding that, it is a joint responsibility. So you're not going to sit around and the boss isn't going to come down and say, okay, here's all the things you need to go do, and then you're going to get to where you need to go. It's like you need to kind of both jointly look and say, okay, where do I want to be in 5 years? And is there a path to get there in 5 years? And what things would I have to do? What are the types of jobs that would be good, in 5 years? And what are the things that I would have to do in order to be qualified for those jobs? And then do you both mutually agree on that? And if you do, and again, not just your boss, but that's going to be shared broadly with a senior leadership team, and then, put that plan into place and then do check-ins on it. But, it's really amazing in my career, so many people never, ever write that stuff down or never stop to say, they just want the next job. I just want the
Yeah.
next
Just
job,
want the next
and I want to
job.
get promoted or at whatever is really important. And it's like, okay, so why do you want that next job, or why do you want to be promoted? Where do you want to get to long term? And I had a woman who was working for me. She wanted to be a CMO, but she only had just more of what we would call the product side. She didn't have the marketing communication side. And I said, you got to get that marketing communication side stuff before you get too far along in your career, because otherwise people are not gonna they're not going to take you as a CMO if you've never had one day in the marketing communication space. They're not gonna feel good about that. So you want to get it now as a director, do a cross-functional move and go do it, where the company's going to give you a chance to do that, and then come back into the product side. You'll exponentially, your career will take off after that.
Yeah, it's interesting. A lot of people don't necessarily think about the multiple steps to get there. So I sort of equate a traditional career path as a little hopscotch. It isn't necessarily you're going one, you might split two, you might go one, split two. You might actually have to jump to another hopscotch pad just to your right because you need to get a parallel experience or another additional piece of experience to pull back in.
Yeah, I mean, you can broaden yourself. I mean, and I think that's always valued. I mean, I think again, you generate. I mean, in our old company, people go out and spend a year in a field sales job, and they come back with phenomenal experience.
Yeah.
Now, better to do that earlier in your career when it's kind of similar to what I was doing when I was doing that management rotation, because it opens your eyes to things and you see things from other perspectives. So when you're going to, put out marketing plans, you're going to understand how your field sales team's going to, really kind of perceive those because you've sat actually in that role.
It's interesting. I never had an opportunity in my career on a management type program, but for everybody that I've known that's gone through it, it's been incredibly valuable.
Yeah, you're just not, everybody looks at things from a different, and again, you can, like I said earlier, if you get to the point where, you get to know those functions you work. I mean, marketing, we work with all the different functions all the time. And so
Yeah.
and at the end of the day, we have to have, it's responsibility without authority. So your influencing skills have to be outstanding to get those groups to follow you. And I always say, let them see what you see. Marketing doesn't want this. This is what the consumer wants, and I'm only the person that's going to tell you if we'll be successful because the consumer's looking for this. It isn't because Jay Spenchian wants it or people that work for me want it. it's my job is to give the organization a view to that end consumer and the competition, and how what we'll do can stand out and be different. And if they see that, they'll get on board and they'll understand, okay, well, that's going to make us all better.
So you have an opportunity. You're sitting on the back patio. 3 or 4 people are with you. And as these folks are getting ready to depart, you have some final wisdom to them. You say, listen, if you just do this, what would it be? And if you just avoid this, what would it be?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that I would say just don't be afraid to fail. I mean, don't be afraid to take a chance. Respectfully challenge the status quo. Because you're going to find that you're going to be working in organizations that are kind of stuck in their ways, and they're going to do different things, or they're going to do things the way they've always done them, but there might be opportunity to get them to change, but there'll be resistance to that change. But if you establish the right relationships and you frame it the right way and you talk to people about it, you can really influence them to try something very different. It might work and it might not work, but don't be afraid. If you've done your homework and you think it's a really great idea and it looks like on paper, I mean, we all know the famous sayings that, the how many times did Thomas Edison fail, or
Right.
all these other,
Right.
right? I mean,
Right.
It's scary how many times these people failed, or the entrepreneurs, all the great entrepreneurs, and you only know that they succeeded. You don't know that they failed 12 times before that but they just kept going and they kept trying and they kept learning. And I think to me, that's it, because I mean, sometimes we can get so afraid. We don't want to make a mistake. We don't want to fail. We don't want to look bad. But if we can learn from that and get better and bring people along the way and everybody learns together, then the whole organization gets better. And then avoid looking like all you care about is yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Avoid looking like this is, I'm having success, but there's bodies in my wake. There's people that I've run over to get to, what I needed to do. You don't want to be in a good position where you've advanced and then others don't feel great about it. I've always told my people, would the people at your level be cheering for you? Would they be happy if you got promoted? Because the really great ones, the ones that I've had, the people that are their peers are just as happy about it as the people below them and the people above them, and I think that because they believe that they're doing it for the right things. I remember one time I was a psychologist was interviewing me, and I just made a statement that I thought was obvious. I said, I got a lot of time for people who are well-intended. And he said, well, what does well-intended mean? And I said, well, isn't that obvious? He said, no. Well, what does that mean? And I said, well, it means that they're not just in it for themselves. They're in it for, whatever the organization is and the people that are working there. And they want the whole team and everybody to succeed. It's lonely when you just get something done and you don't have people to celebrate it with.
No,
right?
Very true. Very true.
Yeah.
Very true. What's the single piece of advice you've gotten over your career where it just resonates all the time? Like you got this one piece of advice and you stick to it.
Yeah, it's a great question. And it didn't happen until I was pretty far along in my career, but I remember one of my bosses said to me, he said, Jay, sometimes it's better to be effective than to be right. And I said, he goes, and
I like that one.
And he tries to use an example, and he says, because technically, like in this situation, you're right. That is right, the right thing to do, or we should do that thing. But given all the other factors, the people that are involved, what's happening, this is probably a better path. It may not be the ideal path and the perfect path, but the perfect path isn't possible because of these other reasons. And, don't get so theoretical and don't, it was just great. It's like, sometimes it's better to be effective. You're going to be effective and you'll be at a 90% or 85% solution, but the 100% solution would have offended people or would have been, while it looked good on paper, it looked like it just wasn't possible and it wouldn't work out for the long term. And so that's something I always think about. It's because I can get very focused on, doing the right thing, and doing the right thing, but you have to consider all of those factors. So,
Great advice.
It was great
advice.
It was great advice. Yeah.
You've had a nice, long, stellar career. You know a lot. If you were going to go back in time and tell yourself one thing, or what have you learned anything along the way that you'd wish you'd have known back when you were starting out?
Yeah, I mean, I think that probably the biggest thing is what I said to you before about not being afraid to fail, and I think that stands out to me. What I'd say to myself is I was probably overly worried about that because I would
Mm.
just think, and it was only because I hadn't failed, and I really in a lot of
Mm-hmm.
things that I had tried, and so I was kind of proud of that. And then I
Right.
realized that you can be if sometimes you're not setting your goals high enough. If you're always if you're going to make
Mm-hmm.
them, so
Mm-hmm.
um, maybe do something that puts you a little bit out of your comfort zone, and maybe something that stretches you a little bit. And that's the other thing. It was just not only I'd say take a risk, but put yourself in a that makes you a little bit uncomfortable
Mm-hmm.
because
A little vulnerable.
yeah, a little more vulnerable because
Yeah.
ultimately that leads to growth and that leads to lessons learned and that leads to broadening your experience. And I found that out a little bit later in my career where, I just wasn't doing that as much and it just really benefited me when I started doing it. Maybe it's a maturity thing. I'm not
Yeah, it
sure,
could
but
be.
I really think that's just something you don't really, like if somebody could say to you, and it's easier to, it's like I see younger kids taking, um, less traditional paths, where they might go do something for a little while. And I think that's wonderful because I wouldn't have done it. I went straight through to undergrad grad school, right? I have big regret. I wish I would have
Hmm.
worked for a while, gone back to grad school because I would have gotten 10 times more out of it. But I was just so, hell bent on getting through and getting started. And I felt like once I got started, I wouldn't want to get off the track and not make any money and, be poor again as a college student. And so, now most good schools won't, they
Won't
won't
even
let you
take
do
you.
that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, they
You need
won't.
at least
They're
5 or 7 years.
exactly. They want you to have that experience because they know it's beneficial. And so,
I do think
um,
that's very beneficial, actually.
yeah, but I think, so to me, it's like, okay, don't be afraid to fail. Just make sure you learn, from whatever those failures. I mean, you can't fail all the time, obviously, but um, if you're not failing, you're probably not pushing yourself hard enough, or you're not challenging the status quo enough, or you're not swinging enough for the fences. And, because
Yeah.
I think I think that that's what you really want to do.
You learn something really great along the way, but you got to take those risks. You just have
Well, it's
to.
back to what we also said we're talking about before, where you also have to be willing to admit what you don't know. And as a
Yeah.
leader, that's another thing too, humility and all that. You don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to always be the smartest person in the room and answer all the questions. So if your team's in there, your team should be answering the questions, not you, because that's not your time to show that you know everything. You're gonna you put your team on display. Your team is prepared. That's a reflection of leadership. That you're going to get credit for. Hey, his teams they're always prepared. They're always ready to go. They're always ready to answer the questions. And I think if you get into unfamiliar situations where you don't have that experience, you have to rely on people that have the experience, and you have to admit to them, like, look, I don't know this area that well, but I'd love to. Can I pick your brain a little bit? Or you know what? Hey, I don't know the answer to that. Can you help me? But if you fake it, like we were saying before, that's just going to tell people, look, this person is going to, they're not sincere about what they're trying to do, or I don't know if I can trust them because
Yeah.
they act like they know what's going on, but they really don't.
That's the number one thing that came to mind when you said that was you've lost all trust and faith from me in your world if you come at me that way. I'm not going to trust you.
Or you build the trust by you're asking for my opinion, and I kind of know you're new to this. You don't have that much experience, and now you'd admit it, and you're
Yeah,
not
I think that's
afraid to
great.
admit it. I think that's great. I think I really respect you as a leader. That you don't have to act like you know everything, and that's not essential. That's not knowing everything isn't essential
Yeah.
for leadership.
Is there anything that I haven't asked you that you would like to make sure we get across? Anything?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's probably, I mean, again, when you're building teams, one thing I would say, and whether you're building teams, whether you're getting opinions, whether you're, assembling project is, be inclusive and make sure that you're getting, like if you're diversity of thought, diversity of opinions, diversity of, kind of experience, and setting up this environment where people, will really always bring their best selves and their most transparent selves, and they'll feel very comfortable. And I used to tell people, it's like my people, if I come in and I say, hey, I think we ought to go do this, I've got 2 or 3 people on my team, automatically I'll go, no, Jay, you know what? Now's not the right time. We don't need to do that. They feel very comfortable, kind of saying that. And, they'll tell me, no, we're not doing that, in a nice,
Sure.
respectful way. But, I've also worked for people where I would be nervous to tell, and I don't have that rapport to say, and we'll probably make a mistake, or it's because I feel like if I did it, there'd be retribution, or I would be thought less of, or I wouldn't be respectful. And again, it's not going to be an environment that I want to be in long term. So if that's the environment, then I'm really not going to want to be in it long term. And so I'll probably want to go somewhere else if all they want is just people that just want to do what the
Yeah.
boss wants to do. But making sure that when you're that inclusiveness and that diversity is so important, because how many times do you sit there and it's like whether you're playing games or whether you're doing projects, and you listen to somebody and you go, wow, I would have
Mm.
never thought of that. I would have never even thought of that. It didn't even dawn on me about that. And I think that that's the kind of things that come out of your out of your teams, out of your the working groups you put together, the functional people you deal with, is you've kind of created that. And so I think that that's really, really important. And I just think people, relationships are everything. You're an individual, but then you're going to be part of a team, and then you're going to be a leader. Oh, the other thing I would say to you is, um, leadership isn't always about just being in charge. That isn't. People think that, and there's a lot of leaders that just want to be in charge. That's not really. I want to be influential, and I want to bring a group of people together, and I want to make sure that I've built a great team, and that ultimately, somebody's got to make the final call, and I can do that. But I've set up an environment that does that, and as long as I can influence the decision, I don't have to be in charge. I just can't. I can't be in situations where I don't have any influence over it. I just feel like I'm helpless, and it's just going to happen without. I guess I want to be involved, but it isn't. It isn't just about being in charge. I mean, people know by your
Yeah.
position, that
Right.
you're in charge. So you don't have to reinforce
Right.
that with anybody. And it's okay to admit you don't have the answer. It's okay to admit that if somebody below you is got a better idea, that you're going to take it, or in another area. It says great things about you as a leader. But that's it. So build a diverse team, build an environment where there's trust and open, transparent dialogue, and ultimately there'll be really, really good discussions, and better decisions will
Yeah.
come from it.
Transparent and open. I like that part a lot. Thank you for that. So, looking ahead, down the road has you excited right now?
I think, to me, just technology and what technology is doing for marketing and for kind of consumer, we would call it consumer journeys. I just think so exciting. I mean, I think, and I want to be involved in that. I mean, in the last 10 years, just with the advent of think of all
Mm-hmm.
the things just with the advent of the smartphone, and again, how people receive information, what media they're consuming, all of that. And I'm dating myself, but when I started off, it was like, okay, so what's your TV? What's your TV plan? What's your
Yeah.
radio plan? And then you set it and you're done. And then every quarter you kind of met and kind of looked at how things were. And now it's like hand to hand combat, day to day, especially for businesses that rely, that are digitally, forward, that really the majority of their spending is that. And you can make a huge difference in a very quick period of time, change people's opinion, get in front of the right people, become very influential with all those tools. And I think that part, it's fascinating. The consumer journey is fascinating. Think about it. Here's another great example. JD Power, probably offend JD Power people that are out there, but years ago I was in the auto industry, and JD Power was the Bible, because there was very limited information with consumers about what made a great car, what the quality of the car was like, those kinds of things. And so they really had to rely on a third party, like either a JD Power or Consumer Reports, for their information. Well, today, you ask my son Joe, who's 21 years old, and you could line up 25 JD Power statues in front of him, and he's going to say, I don't really care about that. I'll just go online and I'll find out from online reviews, or my friends online, what they think about this car, or what kind of thing. And That's totally different than it was, 20 years ago, the sources of influence. But at the end of the day, for marketing, it's still word of mouth, and social media is like word of mouth on steroids. It's like, so you can influence people very quickly with the right things and those tools, and it's just very exciting to think about how much that's changed and how you can do things very differently. But you can't. That's the other thing too, is we love it in marketing. We always like, everybody wants to be digitally savvy or have great digital skills or chops. But at the end of the day, you still have to have a core proposition that sets your product apart from everybody else's, and people have to understand that. You could have the greatest e-commerce site in the world or great search strategy, or some of your SEO and your SEM is all like top notch. But if you don't, at the end of the day, have a point of difference that's different from your competition, and people understand that, and they're not emotionally attached to it, and they're not involved in your brand, you don't have a chance. And so those are some things that you have to think about. And so, all of that is so much more important. What a brand stands for and what it does and how it gives back, 100 times more important than it was 20 years ago, to the generations that are, we're marketing to right now. But at the end of the day, everybody still wants a great product. They want something that is going to really give them a lot of satisfaction. I'm real excited about staying connected to that and learning more and more, and then translating that to, and teaching that to, that's the beauty of it, is that I've been around long enough to see it. I don't want to say come full circle, but it's been almost a 180, and it's going to continue to accelerate, and that's fun.
Yeah, I was going to say, over the course of your career, you've seen a lot of change, and certainly, obviously, the advent of technology has been huge.
Oh yeah, I mean, think about it. It's like, so they know households, and they know what households are spending by your phone information in terms of, just traffic. I mean, they can find traffic patterns from it. This will probably change with privacy. I mean, I think that you're starting to see it already. But at the same time, there's just so much more in their profiles. It's not, we don't know who they are, but we know the type of people that they are.
Yeah.
We know what they're kind of generally doing. And I think it's just a different approach, and it's a different way of kind of marketing. But like I said, at the end of the day, understanding kind of, what do you stand for? What do your competitors stand for? What's your reason for being? All of that as a marketer is so important, and then you have to make sure and that's very clear in people's minds. And if it's not, you make sure it's clear, and then you can use all those other tools and all of that. But the other thing I told you about marketing at the very beginning is every day is different. Every day is, one day might be a production problem where you're working with manufacturing because you're short on supply of something you might have. Another day might be, when you've got customer service problems at your retail outlets, and you're talking to people on the front line about that. And another time you're with the board of directors talking about what you want to do 5 years from now. I mean, those are such variety. It makes it exciting.
Yeah,
and
for
it
sure.
keeps it interesting. So it's not just the same thing over and over again.
If a listener wants to reach out to you, what's the best way for them to
Oh, I
contact
think my email probably. I'd be happy to help in any way if somebody's got it. So email is great. It's always a good place to start. And then ultimately, I look at it every day, and I think it'd be wonderful to hear from people. If I've inspired anybody in any way, it would be fantastic. I'd be flattered. I feel like I admire you for doing this, because I think it's one of those things that we don't stop to do as often as we need to do, is kind of, reflect on, what's made us successful, and what do we, what could we pass back on to people that should span generations.
Yeah, exactly. That was part of the reason for getting behind this. Was I really wanted it to be based on who you are and all the experiences you have. What have you seen? What would you advise? What would you tell people to avoid? That kind of thing. Because I think I love the fact that this generation, I think you said it earlier, I love the fact this generation is more balanced. I think that's huge. But I also realize there's, 40, 30, 20 years from now, the country and organizations all need to still be led a certain way, or at least in a different way, but led either way. And it's interesting how you look around and you go, okay, who's taking over? Who's going to take over?
How much have we all learned from COVID in terms of, I had people on my teams that were begging me to work remotely for the better part of, 2.5, 3 years. And then I had others that said I would never want to work remotely. And then, COVID hits. And after about 6 months, the ones that were begging me to work from home said, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't know what I was thinking.
I got to go back.
Yeah, I got to go back. And the other ones were saying, you know what? I can do this. I don't know if I want to do it all the time, but it isn't as inefficient as I thought it was. And so like all things, it may not be all the way and we might strike a balance. But I think we just, again, we learned, and I had a boss, my CEO, he was, dead set against people working from home because, it's like
can't trust them.
Can't trust them, and I don't know what they're doing. And,
I don't know if they're effective.
They're out mowing the lawn and all this kind of stuff. And I said, at the end of the day, we've got jobs to do. We've got things to get out. And if things are getting out and things are getting done, they're finding a way. Everybody's working very differently. And so this idea of adaptability and flexibility and understanding that not everybody's motivations are the same. You learn as a leader, not everybody's motivated by the same thing. So this blanket idea that you're going to lead every person exactly the same way, kind of throw that away because, you might be motivated by, Steve might be motivated by recognition. He wants to be recognized. Somebody else might hate that. They don't want to be in the spotlight. They just want to be appreciated and just want to know privately, hey, you're doing a really good job. It's great. And you need to understand that about all the people that work for you because everybody's, kind of motivated a little bit differently. And so as you tailor, some of your leadership to, what fits them the best, that's what brings out the best in all of them. And that's what makes that, and again, that adaptability and to be able to read that is a great leadership characteristic.
No, that's great.
Like, that you said about work-life balance before, it's always been important. And I'm a big advocate of it. And I think that it's the healthiest thing that you need to do. And I think you don't have to be always working and always sacrificing to get ahead. And honestly, if you run into a company that's like that and that's not the way you are, it's not a fit. So go find something else.
For sure.
Go find something else. There's a lot of other places to work. And that's why I say you want to make sure that that's a match. And so don't be afraid to, people aren't afraid to ask those questions these days. And it's not a red flag. It's just more an overt question that kind of just gets, it doesn't mean they don't want to work. It means that they want to understand what it's like. And, I just don't like painting. The other thing I don't like doing, I don't like painting generations broadly because think of us as baby boomers. I don't know about you, but I'm a baby boomer and, we are not all the same. Not all baby boomers are the same. We're not all motivated by the same things. So don't paint us all with the same brush. Don't paint all millennials, Gen Z. I mean, there might be some characteristics that are there, but they manifest themselves very differently.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think it's hard to broad brush groups or peoples. Jay, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate it very much. I think our listeners have an opportunity, after having listened to you, to walk away with some tremendous career advice, guidance, wisdom, insights. So I just wanted to say thank you very much for your time. It has been a privilege and an honor to speak with you today. Thank you.
Well, it's great to be here, and I really enjoyed it myself. It's I think what we're doing here is really inspiring, and if it could help others, whether they're young, old, or wherever they are in their career, I think it'd be tremendous.
He is Jay Spenchian, longtime marketing and chief marketing officer in the consumer products, consumer durables, restaurant, automotive, and telecommunication industries. In today's episode, Jay discussed hiring and promoting. What are the biggest challenges that he sees as a senior executive? What's the number one thing that people need to be thinking about or doing? What kind of risks should they be taking in their career? He also discussed why sometimes being effective is more important than being right. 5 key things he asks himself that you might want to ask yourself when you're being interviewed for a position or being promoted. He also discussed the consumer journey and why it's so exciting and how technology is playing an impact in those journeys. This information and more is in the show notes section of this episode on our website. Simply go to www.lessonsfromthecsuite.com/episode 8. You can follow our podcast for free on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, Libsyn, SoundCloud, or your favorite podcast player. If you happen to think this is a 5-star worthy podcast and you leave a written review, I'll be sure to mention your name in an upcoming episode as a small way to say thank you. If you're not yet following this podcast, please go to www.lessonsfromtheCsuite.com, sign up or subscribe, it's free, and you'll receive a PDF on various ways you can pay it forward every day. As always, if you have any questions or suggestions for the podcast, any guest suggestions, or any feedback in general, please send us an email at feedback@lessonsfromtheCsuite.com or go to our website and submit a message directly. Thank you for listening. Until next time.